All right. Okay, welcome. I think we're about to get ready to get started. We're here for the second Application Insight session at Build, and we're very excited for you to have hung around here till 5:30 this evening, last session of the day. In this session, we're going to talk about how you can gain an early warning to performance problems in your application and how you can really resolve those problems as quickly as possible. In this session, we're going to quickly go over what Application Insights is, talk about the three areas where we help you understand if your app's available, performing, and succeeding, and then we'll dive right in to help you understand how Application Insights can help you resolve that problem as fast as possible when you either get a phone call from your customer or Application Insights tells you about a problem. We'll look at how to get started. We'll also look at all the different configuration options for Application Insight, and then really how you can get right back to code and really understand the line of code that's causing the issue or the dependency that's causing an issue. We'll do this across ASP.NET and Java apps, and we'll also look at some Windows Phone app crash data. So by way of an introduction, my name is Vlad Jovanovic. I'm a program manager on the Application Insights team. I've been at Microsoft for just around 15 years, started in Windows, spent a lot of time in Operations Manager and the System Center side, presenting at TechEd and conferences around the world. This is actually my first build. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, my name is Brad Grinslade, and I've also been at Microsoft for a while. I started in Windows just like Vlad. I've kind of come up through the stack. I did Visual Studio for a while and .NET Framework, worked in Bing and services, and before I joined this project, I was working in Dynamics. One of the things that was true for all of those projects really is that we needed telemetry to answer questions. In some places, like in Bing, we have very sophisticated systems that are very useful. Other places, we, probably like you guys, we've cobbled together different pieces of technology and homegrown solutions. So one of the things we're trying to do with this project actually is to bring a lot of that infrastructure we built at Microsoft to you guys in the industry. The other thing I just want to ask a couple of questions, just to get an idea of who's in the audience. How many folks in here saw the first Application Insight session? Okay. All right, so this is mostly different things, so hopefully you'll get a lot of new information here. And how many folks in here are running services in Azure? Okay, good, at least half the room or so. Okay, great.
Great. So Application Insights is delivered as a service. It's available in Visual Studio Online today, and as you saw in the keynote this morning, there's portions of Application Insights that are deeply integrated into this new Azure Portal preview in terms of websites where you saw usage data and also web test data for Azure websites. It's integrated into Visual Studio, so if you create a new app or you have an existing project, it's very easy to add with a few clicks to get it installed and up and running. Tomorrow's session, we're going to talk about how do you reduce the mean time to detect and really ensure that your app is available around the world for your customers. In this session today, we're going to talk about how to make sure your application is performing, and really how do you resolve those performance problems as quickly as possible. Yesterday's session that Brett and Andrew gave was really around how to ensure your app is succeeding end-to-end. So on this slide, what we tried to specify here is if you think about for the data flow of Application Insights for a service, if your service is sort of this column along your left-hand side, you've got a service, customers are using that service from a browser, and then you think about the rows on the table here, talk about the different types of data that is generated by Application Insights, by your service, how to get started into using those different flows, and sort of what that data or what that configuration would result in. So in most cases, there is some default automatic things that happen just by adding Application Insights to your project through the V6 or through installing it on an existing server. And then there's things that you can customize. So in this first row, where Application Insights has this ability to run web tests against your site or do HTTP pings, that's the session we'll have tomorrow where we'll drill in deeply into how to get started, how to use these locations, how to reuse your web tests, and how to really help you understand what is this availability metric that Application Insights shows in the portal, how you can drill it into per web test availability or even per location, how you can do alerting, dashboarding over that entire flow. Yesterday's session went over a lot of the areas in the middle, which are the telemetry that's generated from the browser, and a little bit of the telemetry that can be generated from the server, and covered both what's available by default and the customized things. This session here, we're going to focus on the red areas and really help you understand what you can do from the server-side performance aspect by installing what we call the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, or MMA, configuring application insights, configuring log collection, and what you'll result in, what we'll show is the data that you can get and how it can help you solve your problems. So that's the view for devices, for services. For devices, you have, as you onboard to using these different SDKs, this again was more the focus of yesterday's session. We will show a little bit of the data that we can do to analyze crashes that come through these devices sort of separately, not through data coming directly from these devices. So I just skip that. Sorry, I put that one slide in the wrong section. So what I'd like to do next is really help understand how to get started. Let's switch to the demo here. So in terms of getting started, in a scenario where we're going to show two quick things, because there are a lot of people that didn't see the scenario yesterday, we're going to start from Visual Studio. And if I choose File, New, always hard to do on a different monitor, File, New Project, and I choose a web project here, and I choose to add application insights to my project. I'm going to name it our Thursday Perf Demo, and I'll click OK, and I'll choose an MVC app.
And the only thing that Vlad's done to get to this state at this point in time is he's just added the V6 package from that download. If you go to aka.ms/AI V6 VSIX, then you can download this package into Visual Studio, and it makes it super easy for you to add telemetry and instrumentation and the configurations to your project.
That's right. And we have that reference available at the end of the slide. Now, what this has done is it's created an application insights config file in this directory. And as you saw yesterday, or if you watched the session recording from yesterday, you have the browser instrumentation is added. A few NuGet packages have been added, so you can wire up some of this SDK data, this telemetry data. We're going to focus on some of the other aspects of this application insights config file that specifies the detail that will be the data that will be sent to the from the server side, from the back end, the performance counters, the real heart of some of the data that's coming from the agent. Now, in this case, if I deploy this application to a particular server, it will come with this application insights config file. And the only thing I have to do after to wire up all the data from that side is install this Microsoft Monitoring Agent on that machine, and it will use all of these configuration settings to automatically send that data up. We're going to talk about these configuration settings in a second. So that's the one scenario. If you start from a new project or you add application insights to an existing project, if you deploy that to a particular server and then install the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, you've essentially wired up the scenario end to end.
I think conceptually this is something like the way web.config would work or something like that for your IIS settings. It's the same kind of idea. The application insights configuration file contains all of the core information around how your telemetry is configured for that particular server.
And in this case, what I'm going to show is I'm going to show an opposite scenario where you already have an application deployed. I haven't installed the Microsoft Monitoring Agent on this machine. I haven't added this or edited this project from this machine. And I'm just going to get started with application insights.
Yeah, internally we have a kind of a funny name. We call this Redfield scenario. So this is really, imagine you have a server that's causing you a problem. You don't currently have time to go find which developer's working on it, where the source code is, all that kind of stuff. You got to get up and running pretty quickly. So this is really just a bootstrap, get data flowing right away.
So in this scenario, once you have a Visual Studio Online account, you go into the Visual Studio, the Application Insights Get Started pages. I'm going to name the application.
And remember, this is an existing server that's already been deployed. So
yeah, I've already been using this Application Insights account for other things. So I've named the application. If I go to the Performance page and I choose the new app that I just created, I have the set of steps to enable Application Insights on the service. The first thing that I do, remember in this case, because it didn't have an Application Insights config file, there's a process where this file is created here in the portal. I can save it, and I'm going to try to save it to the right directory where it needs to be for the app that I want to monitor. It's actually in this directory right there.
And so conceptually, this is a little bit like if you used Azure, this is a little bit like your publisher settings. This is to get information on that server that represents the same information you would check into your project if you were on the source control side doing it from Visual Studio, but you're really getting that server, out to that data, the configuration deployed to this server that's already running in production.
Then the next step is to download the agent and execute the agent. Agent install. There's 3 different options for installing the agent, or 3 different modes that the agent can be in. It can send data to a System Center management group. It can send data to an Application Insights deployment, and it can also send data locally. I think if I drill in there, people don't have to squint as much. So I'm going to choose the Application Insights option, click Next. Of course, I'm going to update with Microsoft Update. Click Next, and click to install. Now, while this is working, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to the Application Insights view, and I'm going to just show you a few useful troubleshooting tips for places that you can start monitoring and watching to make sure the agent will start appearing. So the first place, under the Servers view, this view will show you all the servers that are heartbeating to the Application Insight service, that are using the particular tenant storage key and the different account ID that came in that particular file. That's how we link it up to a particular account. You should see times within the last few minutes for a server that's active. The next aspect that you want to check as you're trying to get apps monitored is you want to see which application is being, if any applications are being heartbeated on, and you do that by selecting this drop-down box. And here you don't see our app yet because it's not heartbeating for the app yet. So I'm going to choose no options here. Go back there, and setup is now complete, and it's saying I have to restart IIS. So I'm going to click Finish there. Just go back to the above version there.
Yeah, so that's the one piece at this point. We've added that new piece of code on the server. This is the data. This is the module that's going to send the data from your application and other environmental information back up to the service. So you do have to restart IIS to get that binding to happen.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to let that continue for a bit as the data starts being sent to the server. I'm going to put a little bit of load through the service, and we're going to see that server start heartbeating if it hasn't started already.
Usually takes a minute or two before it starts coming up. So.
No, not yet. So I'm going to switch back to slides, and we'll talk about some of the other configuration that exists for this machine while that's coming back. Back up one. So there's a number of different settings that you can configure in this Application Insights config file that by now you realize you can get into 2 ways into your project. You can get it right from Visual Studio or download it from the portal and put it into the same directory as your app. Now clearly, if the next time you deploy that app, you do want to go back and add it to the project, so the next time it's deployed, it's part of that project, and it'll be there anytime you deploy it to a different environment. Maybe this was my test environment, and I'm going to take that app to the staging environment and then production. So the Application Insights config file has a few different settings that you can configure. The first to think about is this performance threshold. This specifies for your top-level entry points the total transaction time that this transaction takes. And it will be called a performance event, as we'll see in the next demo. if that end-to-end transaction takes greater than 5 seconds. So for modern apps, that 5 seconds is probably a long time. You should think about reducing that to some smaller interval, a second or two, or even less. Now, the lower you do that, the more performance events you'll collect, and the little bit more impact it could have to your overall agent. There's a sensitivity threshold that specifies how long a particular method in the call tree needs to take before it gets collected, and the data for that gets sent back to the server. There's options to configure which namespaces to automatically monitor. By default, all namespaces are monitored. You could specify custom namespaces that you want monitored. No Microsoft namespaces are monitored in there. You can also specify if you want all exceptions to be collected or just the unhandled ones. And then there's settings to specify what memory event settings you want. When IIS private bytes gets to a certain level, there's ability to take a memory snapshot that you can then view and deeply analyze in Visual Studio. Those are the main settings for configuring how this agent works and the way it could be tuned and configured to produce information that's useful for you to solve your different performance problems. There's also the ability to collect log settings. So if you're using Log4net, nlog, or Trace Listener, there's NuGet packages that you can download, install, and configure as part of your app. This only works in the case where clearly you're editing the project of the app, so that you then configure through configuration in web.config these different listeners, and this data will also be sent to the back-end service. The third area to think about integrating for this agent is around some build info integration that I'll highlight how that makes the experience better end-to-end. So that when you create a build, there's a special build info file that can be produced that has the right information that specifies the particular branch that's used, the particular project name, so that when some of these IntelliTrace files are opened, when you're looking at an exception or you're looking at a performance event, you have the ability to automatically connect and download a working copy of that particular version of the app that you have deployed, so that you can get right back to the line of code and you have a complete experience where you can debug that particular problem just like it was during the construction phase of your app, and not only a deployment phase.
Yeah, so to make a couple comments about those last kind of three areas, if you've done something where you've managed, say, a production server and you're trying to do debugging and troubleshooting, catching a memory dump at the right time in production is often super hard. So it's that memory snapshot is super valuable. Getting all your logging in one place in the portal so you don't have to go grab all these different machines and remember where all the logs are stored, that's also super valuable. And then this build integration piece, once you've used it a few times, you won't want to go back. It automatically will connect with your source control and help you figure out which build you have deployed. Say you have a deployment in Europe and a deployment in North America. Which build do you have deployed where? Which machine is running with that particular problem? It's super valuable to have that build info available as a developer trying to troubleshoot a real problem. And the other thing I'll say is that that's one of our goals. We'd like for you guys to evaluate the service. We're in preview. One of our real objectives is to make these DevOps tools really work for you as a developer. That's the key purpose that we have in building these technologies. So we really like your feedback and understand what scenarios you guys are having trouble with. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Brett. So the type of views that you can then generate from your application once you've configured this is a typical performance view so that you would see for a particular server app that you're monitoring. Now, there's a few things that we'll describe here in this particular view. I have this is an app that I've already been monitoring for just over a day. I can see the overall request rate, the average response time graphed. I see bars that show me what my different dependencies are like. This is all data that automatically comes from this Microsoft monitoring agent as it gets analyzed and aggregated through the application insight service. I didn't have to change code. I could influence it through config. And we see all the calls that you're making outside of your app to different dependencies. We aggregate those. We show you how long they took. Let me try to zoom in again. We can navigate to different views. Here are the resources that this particular app is using, what type of call it is, the average, the request per second. I have a graph here, or a list here that's showing me my top 10 slowest requests, and I have other counters that are automatically collected. Over here in the top right, I see a distribution of all the calls that are happening through this app, and we show a percentile view to show you how those calls are bucketed. In this case, this app is doing pretty well. Most of the calls are completing less than 50 milliseconds. A couple other things to highlight. Here I see green dots that show me anytime you've changed the configuration for this particular app through the portal. So you've maybe created a web test, you might have created an alert, you've done something that's changed the configuration of that app from App Insights view, versus a blue dot that shows you when you've done a deployment. So you see I did a deployment there, and I have the ability to sort of drill into a particular point of time, and all the rest of the data in the overall chart automatically is updated to show me the number of events, the data just in that particular window as I'm debugging this particular view. So these are the types of things the agent have. Let me switch to a different app. This is an app that's been running for just a little while longer. It's one of our build demos. The first one you were showing is an app running on a virtual machine in Azure. In this case, it happens to be an app running in an Azure PaaS service. I see the number of requests. I see the same response time. Here, the requests are spread out a bit differently. And I have lots of capabilities to start understanding what the problem is. And first thing I'm going to show is I'm going to show the ability to drill into this top 10 slowest requests. So this takes you to what we call our events view, where I see these events. In this case, let me go in again. Up here you see that the event type is performance by, I'm grouped by heaviest resource. I can change this to all of the type of events that we've collected. Memory events, performance events, or exceptions, and I'll sort of walk through all three. I'll just switch it to all as the view updates, and we'll start looking at some of these. They're grouped, sort of aggregated, so you can see how many have happened the most, and I can drill into these. So let's look at
one feature that we should point out here is that this is also time aware. So if you're troubleshooting a problem in a specific time period, there was an issue last night or something like that, you can zoom in and all the aggregations will update to represent that time period. You'll get you'll notice all the counts have updated here. Vlad is zoomed in. Yep. And that way you can hone in on a specific problem. When did the problem start? When did it peak? Those kind of things. You can do that just through changing your time window.
So let's first take a look at a performance event. And if I open up this performance event, I start getting quite a bit more data about the problem. In this case, I can see the instance of the server that served the event. I can see the application name. I can see what the slowest node was, and I can start to see some data for that. That's not terribly interesting. Let's look at one of these other slower pages. Let's see this here. We have lots of context. We've got all the different parameters that have been passed into this particular method, and we have performance counters that have been collected from the system leading up to the 15 minutes of this performance event, because typically it's never the code's problem. It's typically the rest of the environment that's the issue, and hopefully this helps you really solve and understand if the problem is your code, is your dependency, or is potentially the fabric that you're executing on.
Yeah, and the answer can happen the other way. Sometimes you're talking to your service engineer, and they're convinced that it's your problem, and you'll have this data here to say, hey, the machine was at 90% CPU, and that, this is obviously impacting the way the machine's behaving, or there's some other issue going on.
So the other thing I wanted to show here now, on this particular view, we have the ability to download this IntelliTrace file. And then open it up in Visual Studio, and it's just opening up on this side. Let me drag this over. And you'll see this first thing that you should notice is this gold bar. And I'm going to drill in because I can't quite see it from up here either. So in this here, you can see that Visual Studio is offering to find the particular version of the solution that matches the source that I have deployed here. So with one simple little click here, it'll automatically connect me to the right team project. In this case, it's a team project in Visual Studio Online. It tells me which version of the chain set it is, and I can open this up, and everything will be instantiated for my project right here to start actually analyzing this problem and figuring out what the issue is. If I was already doing some work, it would have shelved that work and got it all available. And in this case, I am running the Visual Studio 2013 UR2 RC version that we announced today, and I have the ability to look at this particular event. I can look at what the hop path is, and I can start to do other work to analyze this particular issue. There's a few improvements that the IntelliTrace team has done to be able to get into the different action names or controller names. In that case, I can drill right into there, or if I click this particular hop path, I can debug this call right from code here, and I do have to just load one new file here.
You're looking for your PDBs here?
Yeah, just gotta get the right. Oh, I think I opened up the wrong. I opened up an event that's too old.
One. Yeah.
We'll do that in the exception analysis. I got carried away
zooming,
swiping in that zoom sort of view. So those are some of the things you can do in this performance event. Let me go back. Yep. Let me go back and look at some of these other exceptions. So that's a performance event. This is based on the settings we specified. Remember, what is a performance event? In this case, I think I set it down to just under a second. If I look through this view here, and let me go into the last view, it was actually this deployment that we actually fixed this build info config file. So all the exceptions that were generated before that deployment didn't have this build info file, and some of these. I think it was a version. It was a version problem. Okay, so if I look into this particular view, let's see if we can get an exception to appear.
There you go.
I actually want one of the ones in ours. So there's a method that we had. So if I open up this particular exception, I have details about the exception here. I have the line of code that particular exception happened in, line 49 on this particular file. I have the ability to then look at other parameters here or open this up in Visual Studio. Open down here. Open the solution again.
This is definitely a problem that's much more aggravated these days when we have all these deployments going on. If you're in a continuous delivery type of mode, it's much harder in a lot of these agile development practices to figure out exactly which code you should be looking at. We know which server is deployed.
So in this case, it had the right PDB already associated to this project that I had open, and it took me right to the line of code where we threw an exception for the event. And there's some really great stuff here that shows me this code map that went right through, showing me the view where my particular issue was. So really great, deep insight into your app, really helping you understand where the problem is in your code, not just running on your machine, but also running in these different environments. And as you saw today, there's even ways that you can actively debug code running in those environments. The last type of event that I wanted to show is a memory event. And we didn't have any memory events in that app, so I'm just going to show a memory event from another app over here to show you what that data set looks like. These are memory events, memory leaks, or different events that may be really hard to debug, really hard to analyze. I should have refreshed this on another view. Let me refresh this and then open up a different event.
And everything we're showing you here, this is that base configuration that Vlad started with. So he just downloaded the config file and restarted the IIS machine, or he did the VSIX and just added the project to his server. The only thing in this case, we had to make sure that MMA was deployed to the server that we were targeting. So say it was an on-prem server, you just download that MMA, install it on there, deploy your application to that server. So this is all just with that base configuration.
Yep, and typically the first thing that most developers are thinking, you guys are probably thinking as well, is, wow, this sounds great, but it's got to be some cost to it. Not a dollar's cost, but in a performance penalty cost. You know,
I thought everything was free.
I'm going to be paying something, right? There's no free lunch ever. And right now, we worked really hard to make the performance overhead as small as possible, and typically in the 1% to 2% CPU range. It depends on the calling pattern of your app. If you have lots of small methods, as we add instrumentation to sort of every start and to analyze if it is an issue, if there is a performance event, that could add a little bit more impact to your service, but it's a very, very low overall footprint.
So just kind of commenting on that, our feature team, we have a rule of thumb that all of our telemetry and logging and the agent behavior and that kind of stuff, as long as it's less than 10% of total overhead, we view that as a sufficient level of performance, and we just optimize past that and scale out, mostly because it saves us so much time to have the right logs, to have the right data, to have the right exceptions. You know, there's a lot of human time that is saved by having these things put in place.
So in this case, we see that we had a particular component consumed over 90% of the value in the IIS app pool recycle settings, so it could be a memory leak in this particular app. We can analyze that. There's a memory snapshot file here that you can go and analyze, open up in Visual Studio, and really get all of that deep information you need to solve the problem, hopefully add it or add the work item to your backlog so that you understand when you should solve that problem, and then obviously deploy it so that it doesn't have this problem.
I have just a quick question there. Get you guys a little woken up out there. Like, how many of you guys already have seen demos of things like memory, memory snapshots and teletrace files, that type of stuff? How many have seen those kind of things before for Visual Studio? And how many of you guys use them every day in your job? We got one guy in the back. Congratulations. Yeah. So for the rest of you, we want you guys to go get application insights, because this kind of thing will actually help you make this part of your normal development practice. So I'm a program manager, and if I assign a bug to a developer, most of the time they have the information they need to go solve that problem. We don't have to go back and sit down with the ops guys and manage access, and we have all the data right there at our fingertips.
Hold on, I just lost. Okay, the next thing I wanted to show is around log collection. So we have a service here that we were showing earlier where we've instrumented a trace listener so that all traces that are happening from the app are collected, automatically sent to App Insight so that they're available here. You can search them. You can get to these logs. You can look for different time frames. You have, I can look for all errors. And this is also part of Application Insight to really help you be able to bring all of the context available for your particular app so you can solve these problems as quickly as possible.
If you want to go ahead and just open up one of these as an example, I think these are coming from probably the trace listener. All you've done at this point, you've added a NuGet package to your code. You probably already have a logging framework, using system.diagnostics or maybe using Log4Net. And one of the nice things here is that that's trapping all the logs from across all your different servers. So if you've gone to scale this thing wide, you've deployed it to multiple data centers, you can aggregate all that data into one place, and you can filter on things like which particular server it was, or other data that you may have trapped in your logging frameworks.
Cool. So the next thing I wanted to show is, remember that service that we added earlier? I've just been looking at it over here. So in this particular server view, the server that we installed the agent on is this called AI Demo VJ2. And in this filter app, you can see, remember this, I called it My New App. You can see that this app is now heartbeating for that server. These are the best places where you can go to kind of see what's happening. First, check to make sure that the server is heartbeating, and make sure then, after you've restarted IIS, you've added some load to that particular application. Make sure that it's actually heartbeating for that server, and you'll see sort of a recent time period. And now if we look at the performance view, this is the same performance view that you saw for other apps, and let's pivot this to this My App service. You'll see that in this particular view, data is just starting to be collected, or not quite. Yeah, there we go. Just data just started. So you'll see more of that come and go as it's discovering dependencies, finding slowest calls, and in this case, this app really isn't doing anything. It was just sitting there, and it was probably the first load is what took it some time. Now, the next area, the sort of last area we wanted to show is on the Java side, and the deal on the Java side, the time period there is 48 hours, is really to give you the same data set, whether you're running an app, .NET app, whether it's a Java app, and in this case we support Tomcat and JBoss, whether that Java app is running on Windows or Linux. There's a set of easy steps that I'll show you next to essentially get started and automatically be able to configure this to start. We do the same sort of deal around being able to view the top 10 slowest requests, different data that's collected. So I could, in this case there's only 2, so I can open this up and see all that rich information. There's no ability to open up the IntelliTrace in this case, but I have all that data at my fingertips, even for a Java app. So if you have mostly .NET and some Java, away you go.
Yeah, one of our goals with this is that we know that you're working in a multi-platform environment and you have different components. You might have different subsystems that you've either inherited or you need to use for a particular functionality. And so we really want to try to get your skills to go across the board. The other thing, you're going to show the metrics one in just 1 minute. I just want to make one comment on the metrics.
We can go to metrics. Which app do you want?
That's fine. The other thing I was just going to make a point of on metrics with that agent we talked about, one of the key things you can configure in that configuration file is you can indicate which custom perf counters you've created on your own services, like in Windows. And that's one of the most important features that we use with the agent is that we have kind of a default set of telemetry that we always collect from all of our web servers. And then for each application type, our developers will do different perf counters to understand their behavior, say their queue length or different features of that particular component. And so we use this component. When you configure it in the agent, all of your perf counters off of all those distributed boxes will get reported back into the same environment, and you'll have just fingertip access to those as well. So think of it kind of like distributed perfmon in this sort of unified interface.
And the performance counters, these are the sort of default set that get created, except for the usage ones and some of the availability ones. There's about 4, actually it shows you the column for the default ones. They get collected at 1 minute intervals, and you can add other counters to collect in that Application Insights config file that's either created through V6 or downloaded through the portal. So that's on the service side. The one thing that we wanted to show on the Windows Phone side is if you do have a Windows Phone app in the store, you have a capability of downloading a crash file as a spreadsheet that has all the crashes available, and got to choose exception type.
Exception, yeah.
And they're relatively hard to deal with in that Excel file. I think the entire crash dump is sort of one column in this Excel file. We have a little tool that in the slides I've got a link to a tool that you can download, execute against one of these Excel files, and send that data into Application Insights so that you have this ability to look at the different calls, look at them aggregated as they're happening. You can drill into one of them, and you have the ability of understanding which modules were loaded, which particular issues existed, and hopefully solve those problems so you have happier customers with your phones and less crashes. And
yeah, I think this is an area where we've gotten, we were in a private preview before. Now this product's available. It's still a preview product, but it's a public preview, so everyone who has a Visual Studio Online account can use all of Application Insights. And we've gotten a lot of feedback about improving the client-based telemetry around crashes and performance problems. This is just one of the pilot projects we're working on to kind of start getting the data. This will be for unhandled exceptions from the store.
Okay, so I'll switch back to slides. and now going back. I got thrown around here. So on the slide side, this is the slide with the phone data, the link to get to the tool that Mike on our team built.
And all these slides will be posted, so you'll be able to get them from the build site.
That's right. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to show, just jump over to one of the typical questions that we got. Where did I put the slide? This one. One of the typical questions that we got at the booth today was, or over the last 2 days, was, I've got an application that runs in a cloud. Customers are using that particular app from as a software as a service. They're signed up for the service. They're using it. And I think by this point you understand that the data from your app is essentially sending data to this application insight service from the browser that's running on your customer side and your app, sort of your server backend. And a few people asked, well, I have 2 other scenarios that I really want to monitor as well. And in this case, you could think about your app having some prod version, some QA version, some performance version. The question was really around, I also have an app that runs on-premise on my customer's environment. And I kind of want to see what's happening in that environment and understand if they're using it and what they're doing, just like I wanted to understand for customers of our SaaS. In this case, you would have a capability of using MMA, using some of the configuration, maybe creating a different app, so you could essentially see some stamp version or some customer version in your application insights portal. Maybe a different Visual Studio Online account, maybe the same one, depending on the scenarios, depending on how you want to have aggregated. And then the final scenario is where the customer has no connection to no connection to App Insight, no connection outside of their corporate environment. And in this case, you can put this Microsoft monitoring agent in a local collection mode so that as it's executing locally on your servers, it's writing some of these IntelliTrace files locally, building that data that you could then ask the customer to FTP or get into the service, get into the developer's hands so you could open it up in App Insight. It was a last-minute addition to the slide deck based on the number of times that this scenario was asked. And now I'm going to try to figure out how to back up.
There was a question in the audience, which is, when will this be released? So it's currently in a preview, and it's, it will be, we would like you guys to use it and get your feedback. It's definitely a service that you can use today. How long it's in preview will be based on how much progress we make and what the feedback is. We don't want to come out of preview too early. For Microsoft terminology, we come out of preview and we start billing for different features of the product. There'll certainly be a free level of this product that will always exist. There will, we plan to have some premium features. We don't know what they are quite yet, but we've talked to folks like the Power BI team and some other folks about different kinds of scenarios we might start to support. But you can imagine in the future we'll have some premium services. At the moment, though, everything in Application Insights is in preview. Everything is for free, part of the service. And it's part of Visual Studio Online, which is just GA'd for the Build conference. So Visual Studio Online now is a fully non-preview feed service. So Visual Studio Online up until today, I guess, has been a preview service. So today Visual Studio Online has moved over, and we're a new component in Visual Studio Online. The one before us was probably the elastic load testing was the feature that came in before us. So we keep adding new developer services into that suite.
So these are the resources that we mentioned. Just a few other housekeeping, then we'll go to questions. At the Build conference, our design research team is here. Jeremy standing in the back over there. If you're interested in participating in different quick pulse studies or usability feedback, or to look at some of early prototypes that we have and really give us feedback, and as we sort of maybe put you in the room behind the one-way screen mirror, definitely talk to Jeremy in the back. These are some of the sort of related slides that we have, or the related sessions to Application Insights if you're interested. I know some of these were yesterday. You could look at the recordings there. And now would be a great time for questions, and we have a few Surface mics to give away, so don't run off too quickly.
Go ahead, you can ask questions at the microphone, or if you can't make it at the microphone,
we'll ask you questions, and whoever gets the right answer will get a mouse. Go ahead there.
So this is my first Application Insight talk. We deploy our code to Azure, and mainly we have issues with worker roles and that sort of stuff.
Good question.
Does this work in that environment? And if so, most of our logging right now is already goes to WAD logs and is already aggregated for us.
Yep.
And we parse that. So will this bolt on top of that, or is it extra overhead to use Application Insight?
Great question. So we're definitely working very closely with the Azure team. As you can see, we have some of those scenarios sort of are already working end-to-end in the new portal preview for the Azure website type of resource. And we will continue to work with Azure closely to be able to add even better scenarios for those when those services are hosted in Azure. Right now, Application Insights works regardless of where your service is hosted, whether it's in Azure or on-prem. So it's really one of these things as we do these investments. We're investing in sort of where the customers are at, but we're investing closely with the strategic Microsoft investments, and obviously Azure is that. You mentioned worker roles. Worker roles right now aren't supported by the Microsoft monitoring agent. Web roles are on the cloud service side, but worker roles aren't. The performance monitoring piece that we talked about also aren't supported for Azure websites, which is a very common question that we get asked, and we're working really hard to make the performance monitoring piece working for Azure websites.
Yeah, two other things I'll note. One is we do have a pretty active user voice community, so I'd go out there and go look at that and make some comments. I do know for a fact that worker role support is a very highly voted item on the backlog list,
Yep.
So it's something that
voted
definitely we know about, and it's something that's in our backlog, not yet available. The other thing I'd say around the WAD and things like that, and how you associate that with something like the log search capability. What I'd recommend in the short run is to kind of keep both in place as you learn our tool and how it works and what it does for you. There's some things that it does a lot better than trying to use the WAD today. If you use, especially with some third-party tools, the WAD's really useful. So, I'd kind of recommend just kind of forking it, and the way ETW works, it's actually very efficient. So, it shouldn't be a big problem for your application.
A couple of questions. You mentioned, will it work completely on-premise, even the analysis tools on-premise?
So the service is 100% in the cloud. All of the agents and the data collection are on premises. So you have to have, there's two things you have to basically have. Unless you're doing the local collection, which is really just a way to get the data locally, to use any of the portal and all the features that we've shown, your agents have to have a way, and your telemetry has to have a way to push up to the cloud over HTTP. So if you have firewall issues and things like that, you'll have to get through, HTTPS, and then and then the data is actually then hosted in the cloud. So the data is in the cloud.
Is there any possibility that a future version would be able to not rely on the cloud? I know that's...
So, right now our focus is to get this cloud service finished and working well. Definitely it's something that other customers have brought up. Again, I'd point you back to user voice, and we keep having that discussion. There's similar questions about some of the features like elastic load testing and things like that. Right now, we have a lot of work to do on the cloud service, and so that's our current focus. So something not to anticipate the next, definitely a few months, but after that, we don't know. So.
Cloud first, mobile first. Doesn't say what second, I guess.
Exactly, right.
So is this comparable to New Relic or AppDynamics?
Yeah, there's definitely aspects that are comparable to New Relic and AppDynamics, and I think New Relic's here. I think other people from AppDynamics probably are as well. A lot of what we have here was something that on the performance monitoring side, was something that we acquired a few years ago from a company called Avocode, and you may have heard it from your System Center IT friends that they may have been installing on your servers that you're running apps on or not. So there is an aspect that definitely is definitely doing similar things there. We feel that right now the App Insight differentiator is really doing sort of all these three things. Some of the usage stuff that maybe you're using Google Analytics around today, the performance monitoring piece that maybe you're using System Center or New Relic or AppDynamics, the log stuff where maybe you're using Loggly or some other tools, and then also the availability piece where you're maybe using Gomez or Keynote or other tools. And the value of the package is really to give you that end-to-end view around available, performing, and succeeding for your apps, deeply integrated into where where our Microsoft developers are. We're using tools like Visual Studio and really making it part of the application lifecycle. So anytime you're starting a new app or you're thinking about building an app, that application insights is just like creating work items and having a backlog. The application insight data is just that vital to the success of that app and to make sure that you're doing what your business needs to do. So that's definitely there's aspects that are overlap.
And from licensing perspective, do I need to have in a backend system center or anything, or this is independent?
Right now, it's independent.
You just have to have a Visual Studio Online account, and then there's various there's pieces of Visual Studio Online about number of users and things like that that you have to use the Visual Studio Online system for. But all the services we presented here are all in preview. So,
Thank you.
Do you have anything equivalent for like a desktop application that runs C++ or like C#, like App Insight for desktop?
yeah, we currently, this question was also asked yesterday's session. We currently don't have what we call a desktop SDK. It's a scenario that we know is important to a lot of our customers and something we're looking at. We can talk offline about your particular scenario, and there may be some things that you can do in the short run.
Kind of a two-part question. You'd mentioned the local mode. Does that require having the MMA installed on the server?
On the server that you're installing, yes. For local mode, correct.
Okay,
Correct.
so the MMA would have to be there.
Yes.
And once it is, you're saving off locally, is it written to disk as a file? Can something be saved
File.
in a database?
File written to disk as a file.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, isn't there a scenario if you want to put it in something like a database, you could use System Center on-prem? Is that also a scenario?
Yeah, there is a capability of using System Center 2012 R2 and doing and you're using those APM features and the rest of the System Center suite to collect it, to integrate it with TFS on-prem and do those scenarios. That's definitely also an option.
Usually, as a part of a team, how would you go about creating the account for the application insights service? Like when I'm working in a team, I would also like to share the great reports and work together with the team. Also, sometimes, I mean, some of the reports are pretty nice, like what kind of traffic was there on
Yes.
a particular page. You would also sometimes like to extend it to your customers so that they can benefit from it. So
Great.
Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
the basic scenario is that you would add those users in the current way the preview works. You'd add those users to your TFS or Visual Studio Online account. There are different user types, things like a basic type and things like that. So you can add users to that, and then they'll have access to the system. And really, what we're trying to do is get people to collaborate through the portal and share the data that way.
And right now, there isn't a model where you could give some user read-only access. And right now, there aren't APIs to extract the data so that you could maybe put the data in another portal. But those are definitely things that are
so to be
high
more
in the
clear,
backlog.
you have to give those people access to a Visual Studio Online account. What we've done internally for a lot of projects is we have created a new Visual Studio Online account for that particular set of teams that's working on a particular project and things like that. So.
you just said TFS. I just want to confirm this is not tied up to the online TFS, so you don't have to have a team project.
You don't have to have your
You don't have to have a team project. Like
or
I
your
kind of
code there.
misspoke. So
Correct.
Visual Studio Online is kind of our brand for all the developer services in the cloud. And that's the portal that we go through. So you'll have to create an account on Visual Studio Online, but you don't have to use their source control. You don't have to use the project system to use the features.
Okay, awesome.
Correct.
My question is, where is the data is stored in cloud server somewhere? Do we have total control over it? Can we control the expiration? And is the data shared with stored in a shared place where other data is also stored? So I just want to know if usage data will be totally control-based.
Yeah, so I mean, the short answer is it's a multi-tenant system the way it's implemented. So data is, think of it as it's shared in memory, if you will, but it is a multi-tenant system that's just like SQL Azure or any of these other features that we have that are multi-tenant. You don't currently control things like expiration of the data. But however, the data is restricted to your usage, so it's not something like a system where the data is used for advertising for some other purpose or something. It is owned by you, just like if you had provisioned, say, a SQL Azure DB or something like that. However, you don't have that level of control yet. in the future, again, back to the backlog, there's things that we know people want around managing things around their data retention and data locality and things like that, but those aren't currently available.
And today in the preview, most counters that are coming from the agent at a 1-minute interval are stored for 60 days. The most events that I showed, those memory events, performance events, exception events, those are stored for and available for 7 days. And then usage.
Yeah, usage data currently is stored for currently a year. And the log data is expiring right now at 30 days, I think, or 60 days. 30 or 60 days, I don't remember actually right now.
Okay, another quick question. So do you have out-of-the-box counting of calls to Azure tables, blobs, and stuff, other than, I know that you already have bindings for Web API calls.
Yeah, there's, in the dependency resource, then it will also calculate different blobs, and in that sense, it looks like just a resource to the system.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I think related to the data question, when I create a Visual Studio Online account, the only choice is North America. Does that mean Application Insights is moving the data to North America?
Currently, the preview, all of the data is stored in North America. There is a small exception, which is we do worldwide data collection, and so there's transient data stored in other data centers. But currently, all the data that you saw in the reports, all that data currently is stored in North America. If there's a specific locality requirement you have for data, then you can let us know. We can talk about it and understand. It's definitely the kind of feedback we want from the preview.
So I think if we're shipping log data, it might contain personal information. So that'd be very difficult in Europe to ship into North America.
Yeah.
Yep.
I understand the scenario, but currently it's in North America.
Thanks.
Yeah, for the on-prem scenario, is the MMA redistributable so you could bundle it with an installer and pre-configure it for a client?
Great question. So right now, we don't have an official redist for MMA, but it is a free download that you can download from Microsoft.com right now.
It's in the download center.
It's in the
It's just a regular download from the download center. But I don't know if there's a redist license.
It is a CDP or preview. We've never done, I don't think we've done I don't know of a redist for it. So,
but this would be a good scenario for us to understand. And then, right now we've kind of assumed the download center is pretty much accessible by everyone, but there may be a scenario that's easier for you guys to install.
The scenario is just really for ease of customer use to roll out.
Support, basically. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Okay.
I have another question. Gentleman already asked about support for SDK in desktop applications, and you said there's no support. And I believe it's the same for Silverlight. But how hard would it be to? It's a service, nevertheless, right? Most probably a REST service. So how hard would it be to write a client?
Yeah, so right now what we have is we our sort of official position is we don't have a documented REST endpoint, which means we would potentially break you at any point in time. So we can talk offline about what kind of choices you might have. And what risks you might have. There are some internal teams that have done some pretty interesting things, but they're at Microsoft, so we don't worry so much about breaking them. It is something we understand, that we want to have a documented REST endpoint, and we will, but it's just not currently available.
Is there any SDKs in the pipeline for like desktop or Silverlight?
Yeah, I mean, it's the standard Agile answer. We have a backlog. They are on the backlog. I know for a fact they're not, say, for example, they're below something like having worker roles work. So,
or Azure websites. Yeah, right now it's not.
There's certain things that are currently more important from our sort of resourcing perspective, but we can talk about it offline. And I really do encourage you guys to use your voice and let us know what your position is and see if your fellow developers have similar concerns. So.
Okay, I wanted to ask the following question. Since those monitoring, it gets a lot of data from the monitor applications. Is it possible after, let's say, passing a threshold, like the CPU usage, if you pass 80% or 90%, to be notified somehow?
Yes. So I didn't get a chance to cover that. We're going to spend a little bit
tomorrow, right?
more time on alerting and sort of dashboarding tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean,
most of the metrics are alertable.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, that's the whole reason we do a bunch of this stuff. There's kind of two kind of broad scenarios. One is to get alerted when something happens that's not what you want. The other one is to have the data available when you're doing something that's on the backlog, like improve this performance item or fix this exception, have the data available at your fingertips. And so one is send me an alert in the middle of the night. The other one is, I need to go and spend a week working on something, and I don't want to just sit and watch, how to connect, debug against as cool as the debugging in production sounds in the demo, which I liked all the demos today. A lot of times that's not really what you want to do. So those are the two scenarios. So we're actually just out of time, guys. So we're going to go over like 30 seconds or a minute here if some folks want to get in the contest for a question. So I'll ask the questions. Vlad will decide if you've answered it correctly. And you can just shout it out or raise your hand or something. We'll try to be civilized. So what are the 3 things that Application Insights helps you with?
Monitoring, troubleshooting performance issues, and then alerting and showing system health.
Close.
Availability, performance, and diagnostics.
Close.
Availability, performance, and diagnostics.
Availability, performance, and succeeding.
Yes! We got a winner in the back. Available, performing, succeeding. Okay, so you guys are close. But there's some other ones coming up, so you can hang around. Okay, how easy is Application Insights to use? Okay, I got Barry at the front here. That was good enough. Barry was close enough. Okay, to capture an exception from a production server, what must you do? Okay, I like nothing. Nothing is almost right, which I wish it was nothing, but you have to install the agent right now. So it's very close. Almost nothing. It should count. I argued with Vlad earlier whether nothing should count. And he said it should not count, because otherwise the rest of his demo wouldn't have made any sense. What session is going on tomorrow? Alerting. I heard alert way over in the back first. Okay, one more. Okay. This is a little bit harder one. You had to really be paying attention. Which 3 logging frameworks are currently supported? Okay, you finally got it there. Yes, sorry, close, very close. I think you're almost on a bunch of them. We appreciate you guys staying so late. We would really appreciate you guys trying our service out, even if it's just on a small project, because we would really like your feedback. Our goal is to make an outstanding developer tool for DevOps type scenarios, and we really want to build something you guys are going to use. So.
You guys really have this turned on in your production environments?
We really have it turned on in production environments in a bunch of our services. There are services such as that you've probably heard of, like there's services that you use on your phone that you might have video chats with people. For example, not Link, unfortunately, but Skype. We have some things going on. We have a bunch of work we're doing with Xbox. We have a bunch of work we're doing with MSN, the Azure portal, Visual Studio Online. I mean, obviously some of these, may not be obvious, but some of these systems have a bunch of infrastructure they've been building over time, and there's different stuff going on. So I cannot say that every single service that Microsoft is using all of this every day as their primary thing. There are a bunch of services that are using this as their primary source of telemetry and their source of debugging and managing their service. And more we're having people contribute and help us make this a reality. Most of our internal, what we call dog fooding at Microsoft is, most of our feedback has come from our dog fooding customers, and I would say 90% of our current data flow is coming from internal customers. But the reason it's 90% is because we have some really big apps. I'd say from an application count perspective, there may be 10% of all applications. It's just the biggest apps that have taken a bet on us so far have been internal.